Hi everyone, my name is Liz. I'm going to be leading today's workshop on coding in PsychoPy for the COG Summer Workshop Series. So before we get started with the workshop today, there are three different things you're going to want to do. The first one is go to psychopy.org and install the standalone software version of PsychoPy. It should be compatible with Windows, Mac. I think it's also compatible with Linux. You may need to update your Python version or install a different Python environment with a more updated version of Python. But if you get stuck on that, we can talk about that during the workshop. The second thing you'll need to do is download the stim folder from the GitHub page, because that includes all of the stimuli and experiment information that we're going to be reading into our script during the workshop today that will ultimately result in the experiment design file that we're going to create, or experiment script that we're going to create. And the last thing that you're going to want to do is download the adorable task.py script from GitHub. And that is the script that's going to ultimately result in our experiment, but we're going to add to it as we go throughout the different tutorials in the workshop today. And there are two main objectives to the workshop today. The first being that I'd really like to introduce key components of coding experiments in PsychoPy. And the second objective of today's workshop is to review different experimental design concepts that might be particularly helpful for neuroimaging tasks. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that in the concluding video at the end of the workshop today. So why would someone want to use PsychoPy over the numerous other experimental design software packages that are out there? I think the two biggest reasons for me are that PsychoPy is free and open source, so anyone can use it on almost any computing platform. You don't have to pay for licensing fees or dongles or try and make sure that your computer has the exact right specifications. It's fairly flexible and it's really easy to use. And then the second reason is that there are a lot of online resources available for people learning how to use them or creating different tasks. PsychoPy has put a lot of work into building really good documentation and also facilitating a really thoughtful and helpful user community. So there are also different message boards that you can post to if you get stuck on something or aren't able to get help from someone while you're developing your experiment. And then there are two different components of the PsychoPy software. The first is a coder IDE, which basically is a place where you can write and execute different Python scripts using this coder view. And then on the other side, there's a builder view, which is a GUI-based software platform that I'll show you, but we've covered in previous workshops, that basically requires no coding experience, but allows you to still use PsychoPy and Python code under the hood to build your experiments. So there are a couple of reasons why you might want to use the builder instead of the coder. Some people, because there's no coding experience necessary, it can be faster to develop experiments. Similarly, there's a systematic framework that the builder follows. So it's easy to understand your experiment later. You don't have to go in and comment your code. And the developers of Python think that this can also lead to fewer bugs. If your experiment fits well within that systematic framework, it is really easy to plug and play with that experimental design. And I think probably the biggest benefit of using the builder is that experiment can compile really easily to a web experiment. And currently PsychoPy only supports experiments that are developed via the builder to be automatically converted into JavaScript or HTML to be released on their online experiment platform, Pavlovia. But there are also reasons why someone might want to use the coder versus the builder in PsychoPy. The first being that you can implement much more complex designs, so you can break out of the kind of standard trial or block structure or drawing loop cycles that the GUI, that the builder uses. You also know exactly what the code is doing. So you're able to comment your code and design the experiment in the way that makes most sense to you. So as long as you're using thoughtful coding practices like commenting your code, like including different outputs that are helpful to you in the future, you'll still be able to know what's happening in your code years later and what your experiment is doing. That responsibility just falls onto you. The other thing that's really nice about the coder is because you are just scripting in Python, there's a lot more flexibility in what you can do with that script. So if you really wanted to, you could either run pre-processing of your data or run analyses in your experiment script. But that also allows you to do more flexible things like update the task in real time or implement more kind of complicated logic structures, which ties back to that more complex design thing that I talked about a couple of seconds ago. So for today's workshop, we're going to be going over things like basic stimuli presentation in the coder, collecting responses from both the experimenter and from our subjects, looking at how to display different experimental conditions using something called the trial handler, and also different timing components that that we'll use in the coder in PsychoPy. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're interested in using the Builder GUI, definitely check out our workshop from last year led by Susan Benier. It goes really in depth into the different functions of the Builder and how to build an experimental task using that GUI. And with that, let's get started. The first thing we're going to want to do is open up PsychoPy. And let's do that really quickly so I can give you an overview of what will happen when we open the program. It can take a couple seconds. Sweet. Okay, so the first thing that comes up anytime we open PsychoPy is it has this cute little tip of the day. Some of them are funny, some of them are helpful. This one is just talking about different units that you can use. PsychoPy was initially developed as a like cognitive science, vision science experimental design software. So there's a lot of really nitty-gritty details in it that we probably don't need. This is that builder view that I told you about that opens up, but we're going to close out of that today. And the two main components that we're going to be working with today are the PsychoPy Coder IDE and the PsychoPy Runner. So anytime we want to edit a script here in PsychoPy, we'll open up a script, write our code, and then when we're ready to run it, we'll press this green run button, or we'll press this send experiment to runner, which basically will allow us to run the experiment separately. You can run it through the coder as well, and then different outputs will print to this output section in this shelf here, but also in this standard output here. So that can be really useful when you're debugging your script, and also if you want to be double checking that things are running well in your script as you're running a study session, you can look for them here. So with that, let's go ahead and open up our adorable task and our workshop information and get started with those first tutorials. Thanks.